Estuary Program, and
This
Congress,
meeting is being recorded.
thank you. And Congress actually established the estuary programs back in 1989. Sarasota Bay Estuary Program is one of 28 nationally. And speaking from Sarasota Bay Estuary Program is our executive director, Dave Tomasko. He has 30 years of experience in water quality assessments. He's got his PhD. Oh boy, let me see. I wrote this in shorthand. um, he has a PhD in biology, a master's in marine biology, and a bachelor's in biology. And he was the first ever Sarasota Bay Estuary Program scientist. Megan Berry also is from Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, will be speaking with us. She is the program outreach manager. And apparently she does an awful lot of things. She has her degree in environmental science and a master's in sustainable policy. And she coordinates with the Citizens Advisory Committee of Sarasota Bay Estuary Program and organizes volunteer events and much more, I'm understanding. So I don't know if Dave or Megan are going to start, but we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you very much for the very nice intro. And what we're going to do is, since Megan is much more technologically astute than myself, she's going to give she's going to bring the presentation up, and I'll just toggle through. So you're going to hear me say next like about 40 times. So I apologize about that, but that's how we're going to do it. And so, Megan, if you could kick us off.
Perfect, I will do, and I'm gonna take the second half of the presentation. Dave's gonna take most of the first. So you'll hear from both of us there, but thank you for having us, and we'll jump into it.
Perfect. So first off, I wanted to just notice how nice this looks on the front. This is because of Megan. If you've seen the presentations we used to give, they kind of looked all clunky, like a 1970s East German, kind of like a communique. This is us doing a lot better job. And we don't want to make it sound trivial. This is the really important part of bay management is this kind of like a three-legged stool. We need the regulators to do their job. They don't always do it. We need the regulated community to do their job, which means communicating the problems that they have. And we also need the public to do their job. So we need to have the public aware of the kind of things that we're finding in the bay and the things that need to happen. So next, please. So we always start off with quality of life. So Sarasota Bay has thousands of people with boats, and I'm one of them. And this is what a lot of our residents do. This is what a lot of when we talk to elected officials, we're like, this is what your constituents do. The picture on the left is Manatee County. It's not always that bad, just around Longboat Pass. This is a Memorial Day weekend. Picture on the right is Sarasota County, right around New Pass. That's kind of like a typical summer scene. And what a lot of people do around here is they go out in weekends, in their boat, and they throw their anchor out, and they want to wander around in waist deep water, and they want to see their feet, and they want to be able to not have rafts of macroalgae wrap around themselves, their kids, or their friends, or their grandkids, or something like that. So healthy bay is important to our water quality. It's important to our quality of our life. And next, please. The other part is it's important to our economy. We always stress this as well. There are 20,000 jobs that are associated with bay-related activities. And that is the commercial fishing village of Cortez, the recreational fishing guides. There's two of them live on my street. But the waiters and waitresses and bartenders and restaurant owners and the people who rent out jet skis, all of these are bay-related activities. And there's an economic uplift associated with proximity to the bay. The value of your house is more dollar per square foot if you're on the bay than across the street or a couple of blocks away. And this was quantified back in 2017. So it's a bigger number now. And that was about $3 billion. So the proximity to the bay is associated with about a $3 billion property value uplift, which means our ability to pay for public schools and fire and police is due in large part to people wanting to live on the water. But they don't always want to live on the water. People didn't want to live on the water in 2018 in Sarasota Bay when we had that bad red tide. or in 2021 in St. Pete when they had their wicked red tide, or back in Tampa Bay in the 1970s, or, you know, where I'm originally from, the Potomac River. Potomac River didn't have hardly any waterfront development back in the 70s because it smelled so bad. So a healthy bay is important to our economy. We stress that. Next, please. But we also want to talk about our Florida wildlife heritage. So when we talk about habitats, we want to make sure people understand what we're going to talk about. You're going to hear a lot about seagrass meadows, and seagrass is not marsh grass that grows like up in Georgia or Rhode Island. It's stuff that grows underwater, and it's not the stuff that grows in sand dunes. It's the stuff you see there on the left-hand side. And for it to grow, it needs the water to be clear enough for light to transmit through to give it enough sunlight that they can grow. And so water clarity is important for habitats such as seagrass meadows. And as you can see the school of bayfish there, it's important for fish and crabs and shrimp. If you like to eat fish or catch fish, it's important because like about 70% or so of the recreationally and commercially important species of finfish and shellfish spend at least a portion of their life cycle in places like Sarasota Bay. Next one, please. And I used to have an intro slide that was a little bit different, and I had a picture of a starving manatee in River Lagoon, and that kind of just triggered people, and they just didn't think beyond that. So this one does the same thing, but in a more benign way. So this is the cutest picture in the world, and who wouldn't want to do this? Bottle feeding like baby manatees. But the reason why humans are bottle feeding them is because their moms starved to death. And their moms starved to death over on the East Coast because lack of seagrass resources because of pollution problems. And the last 2 years, we've lost about a third of the Florida East Coast manatee population. Not statewide, but statewide it's coming up to 20% maybe. But about a third of our manatee population on the East Coast of Florida died, mostly in the Inner River Lagoon because of degraded water quality. And if you remember how big of a deal this was last year, all the articles and newspapers, stories, and network news talk about manatee deaths, there were 1,100. Well, we already have, I apologize, I just updated it. It's 717 as of a week ago. So 717 dead manatees this year on top of 1,100 dead last year. So this is a concern. Next, please. So if we don't want what happened in the Inner River Lagoon to happen in Sarasota Bay, then we have to understand what this graphic shows. And what this shows is this is the general relationship between nutrient loads and the system response. So as you increase nutrient loads going left to right, you go from a place that might be, you know, on the far left-hand side might be something that Sarasota Bay never was, like the dry tortugas or the Marquesas or, you know, the Exuma Islands. That's not what Sarasota Bay is. On the far right-hand side is what Inner River Lagoon is right now. We don't want to be that either. And the trouble is in Florida, and it's not just EP, it's EPA guidance as well. If you want to determine the health of Sarasota Bay or Tampa Bay or the Inner River Lagoon, the only thing you have to measure is the water itself. And that sounds like a great idea. Water quality is about water, so just measure the water. But the problem is there's a bunch of things in there that are important for the health of Sarasota Bay, and you only have to measure one thing to be able to come up with a report card. So next one, please. So what we do with our partners is we measure everything in here. We measure the water quality, but we also, we have seagrass maps that are done every 2 years by our friends at the Water Management District. We have the fish population is sampled on a regular basis every year by our friends at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And we actually go out with trained volunteers, and Megan's done it, I've done it, our whole staff has done it. And volunteers, you know, folks, you know, like you have gone out and collected this data for how much macroalgae we have in the bay. It's really important. So everything in there is part of our report card, except the fish, because we can't put the fish in there because you use different gear types in different locations. So that's a little bit different, but all that stuff is measured. Next one, please. So we have a report card, and it's based on a reference period. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we have a report card for every year from 2006 to 2021 for each of those 5 bay segments. Palma Bay in the north, the big part of Sarasota Bay, Upper Bay, we call it. And then in the lower bay, there's really kind of 3 distinct areas: Roberts Bay, Little Sarasota Bay, and Blackburn Bay. And so we have a report card for each year for each of those 5 bay segments. And we have a reference period. And the reference period is 2006 to 2012. you need a reference period because you need to know, what am I trying to get to? How do I know if I'm successful? And so we don't know what Sarasota Bay was like 100 years ago. We don't know what it was like 50 years ago. We don't have data. But we do know that not that long ago, 2006 to 2012, we had better water chemistry. We had macroalgae data, and there was less of it around. And we had a 28% increase in seagrass coverage. So all those things indicate to us it was a healthier bay. And that's really important because that reference period allows us to figure out where we are and what we need to do. Next, please. So this is our report card, and we color code it. We color code it because what matters is not really the number. What matters is the pattern. So the cooler colors, the blues and the greens, represent healthier conditions. And as you see, 2006 to 2012, it's almost all blues and greens because it was healthier across the bay. And Tomasko Bay still is healthy. Tomasko Bay stays in that blue range, which means Tomasko Bay, despite the development in the watershed, despite the fact that it's got actually a little bit less flushing than other places, continues to be a healthy system. We can learn a lot from how Tomasko Bay happened to develop. The upper bay was doing pretty good until about 2017, 2018. And we think that's due to three things. 2016 red tide, if you remember that one. 2017, we had Hurricane Irma. And 2018, we had a red tide that was 10 times worse than the 2016 red tide in terms of cell counts. And so a lot of folks remember what it was like in 2018 in Sarasota Bay, and it was not good. But the reason why we had such a bad red tide, we think, is because humans don't cause red tides, we cause them to be worse. So 2018, May of 2018, we had more than 10 inches of rain in our watershed. That is by far the greatest amount of rainfall in 100 years. That's the end of the dry season. So we enter the wet season with this big slug of urban stormwater runoff. And then 2018 had the greatest amount of wastewater overflows of any year on record. And that's, we think, why we made this red tide so much worse than it would have been, because we loaded it with nutrients. If you look in the lower bay, it's in yellow back in 2013. So you can't blame that on a hurricane or a red tide. So what happened in 2013? That was the beginning of about a 5-year period where we had wastewater overflows that totaled more than 750 million gallons. It was treated wastewater. It wasn't raw wastewater, but it had a nutrient content that was too high for it to be discharged into the bay, but it was discharged anyway because of it exceeding the capacity. So we had more rainfall, the plant was able to handle it, they put it in a pond and it overflowed. It was treated effluent, it wasn't raw sewage, but it had a nutrient content that we think set us back about 20 years in terms of our water quality in the lower bay. But look how quickly we start to recover. And the last year, 2021, is all blues and greens. And the neat thing, this is one of the coolest things, 2021's water quality was at least the best water quality in the last 5 years. And in some places, it's the best water quality we've had in more than 15 years. So you hear this a lot, you know, systems are delicate. It's a delicate ecosystem. That's not true. Sarasota Bay has kind of existed for probably 5,000 to 8,000 years. It's not a delicate little ecosystem. For you to actually cause problem to it, it has to be a massive problem and it has to last for years. And because we actually took a lot of action to fix the problems with wastewater, and because of the other good things that have been happening in terms of stormwater and public education, we're seeing this bay recover. And so we don't have it back to where we want it to be. And it's only 1 year. And, you know, we've also had like a hurricane, but for the most part, we're pretty confident that if we do the right things, we're going to get our water quality back. And that's the first thing you have to do. Next one, please. So the indicator that tells us overall, how are you doing, is seagrass meadows. That's the reason why we have the starving manatees over on the Indian River Lagoon. Our seagrass coverage decreased about 22%. And however, that decline seems to have hopefully leveled off. And in the lower bay, that decline has leveled off. So bay-wide, however, we're down about 2,000 acres. We're not going to plant our way out of this. We're not going to like put 2,000 acres of seagrass out there. It's not how it happens. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on getting the water quality back, and then that will allow the seagrass to come back. Because from 1999 to 2016, an area from Tarpon Springs down to Boca Grande, we added 40 square miles of new seagrass meadows. Not 40 square miles, 40 square miles of additional seagrass that occurred, and we didn't plan it. It came back when our water quality got better. So that's what we're planning on doing. Get your water quality back. It's kind of like the Field of Dreams approach. If you build it, they will come. If you get your water quality back, the habitat will come. That's what we're planning on. Next one, please. Sorry, my dog is like going crazy in the background. So how do we keep on the right track? Well, we have to quantify what needs to be done. It can't be like generic guidance about like, well, we just polluted. We need to know exactly how much. What do we need to do? And we need to obtain agreement with stakeholders, which means the people who operate stormwater collection and conveyance systems have to be on board. The people who operate wastewater treatment plants have to be on board. The regulators have to do their job. We had 750 million gallons of wastewater, and it didn't happen in 1 year. It happened over 5 years. So why did it keep going? Why was it after 1 year and 2 years and 3 years and 4 years and 5 years? It's because actually the regulated community wasn't told that they had to fix it. The reason why we don't have those overflows anymore is because they were taken to court by Suncoast Waterkeepers. They're a big part of the reason why we're better now than we used to be. And we need to enact it, and we need to make sure that people do what they said they're going to do. And they've made commitments to spending hundreds of millions of dollars, but we need to make sure that they follow through and we find out whether or not what we think is going to work actually does work. Next one, please. So this is the cool part about it. So we're all about trying to quantify things, not just generic, but like what exactly should I do? And so if we look at this, this is a nitrogen loading comparison of that healthier time period, 2006, 2012, and the more recent years, 2013, 2019. And we run our pollutant loading model, we see that the difference between those two is about 20%. And so our take on it is, the reason why you have these problems, these cascading problems, is because your nutrient load increased 20% or 12 tons. So we need to find 12 tons of nitrogen to reduce. And that's the next question is, can you do it? Are there 12 tons that you can get? Next, please. And the answer is, yeah, there's a lot more than 12 tons. So this is where I get really excited, because what this is basically saying is what we think needs to happen can happen. It's within the realm of possibility. There's a lot more than 12 tons that we could act upon. So we don't have to make it perfect. We could get back to when we were a healthier bay because the controllable nitrogen loads are greater than the load reduction. And so that's what we'd really like to stress. Reclaimed water, which is a good thing, but reclaimed water from the city of Sarasota has got a low nitrogen concentration. And if you overwater your lawn, it's not a big deal in terms of nutrients. Reclaimed water that came out of the Bee Ridge wastewater treatment plant in Sarasota County, if you added 30 inches, which is kind of like the guidance about what you need for a St. Augustine lawn, you're adding twice as much nitrogen as what that lawn needs. And if you overwater, then you're adding even more. So if you water like 60 inches with 18 milligrams per liter, you're adding a lot more than that lawn needs. And so you're creating this condition of nitrogen coming out into the groundwater. So Bee Ridge upgrading to AWT is going to be doubly important for the bay. Spills and overflows. We don't really have the spills and overflows that we had a few years ago. And I know about that because we get a check every time that happens, and we don't get that check anymore, which is good. I don't want that money. We want the better system. Next one, please. And so this means that, like, so for this part, it's pretty optimistic. There are load reductions that are needed, but there's sources that we can actually act upon. But things are going to be complicated. So we want to give this message to people. The next 2 to 3 decades are not going to be like the last 2 to 3 decades. We're going to have population growth. We've always had that. We have not planned for it. And we're going to do that moving forward. But we also have climate change. And climate change is real. It's not a future scenario. It's happening right now. We have data to show it. And the things we have to deal with are sea level rise, increased temperatures, and increased frequency of tropical events. So let's work through them a little bit. Oh, first off, I apologize. Go back to one, Megan. So that picture is what we call blue sky flooding in Longboat Key Village. That's not rainwater. That is water from Sarasota Bay coming up into the street because it's a high tide on a full moon. That's blue sky flooding. Next one, please. So when we talk about nitrogen and nutrients and water quality, we got 100% buy-in from every one of our elected officials. I've never had anyone push back against it. But when we talk about climate change and carbon, It's not the same buy-in. So what we do is we don't use models and reports from people in Gainesville or Tallahassee or DC. We basically say, here's the data, and we actually, that's a live link. So if you get this presentation, you click on it and it'll take you to the data from which we got this. This is monthly sea level at St. Petersburg. It's the closest long-term gauge. And so there's a lot of variability. There's a lot of bouncing around of numbers, right? Because the water level changes. It changes over the course of a day. It changes with high tide, low tide. We're in a place with what's called semi-diurnal tides. So some days you have one tide, some days you have two tides. We have full moons and new moons and, spring tides and neap tides. So there's a lot of variability, but there's an underlying pattern too. And the way we can look at that is by breaking this down into smaller time periods. And if we do that, we kind of see that over the last 20 years, that's that graph in the middle, excuse me, over the last 20 years, we have gained about 6 inches in the last 20 years. That's 3 inches per decade. The long-term trend is 1 inch per decade. And a lot of that 1 inch per decade is driven by the last 20 years. So the reality of what we're seeing with sea level is a lot of variability with no trend, but 6 inches in the last 20 years. And we believe that that is going to increase. That's actually not a linear line, so it's a line that is changing over time. We believe that we're going to see probably another 8 to 9 inches of sea level over the next 30 years, which means what? Well, first off, this is Riverview Boulevard in Bradenton, if you know where this is. So if you're coming across, let's say you're coming across the bridge over the Manatee River and you get onto Manatee Avenue, State Road 64, you're heading towards the island. Right as you go over Wares Creek, turn right and go down, I think it's 22nd Street. This is what you see. Go there on a high tide with a full moon, and this is what you see. This is blue sky flooding. This is not a king tide. A king tide is a different type of spring tide. This is just full moon, and it floods so often that they actually have these kind of like, flood warning signs. They just don't even take them back to the shed anymore. They just leave them in the grass and just roll them out in the street. So this is the kind of thing that's going to happen more often. We're going to see more street flooding, and we're going to see street flooding when it floods on a high tide. And you see that picture on the right where that orange coat is? See the little concentric circle in the water? That's the water from the Manatee River coming up into the street. And if you're there on the right tide, you can see fish in the road there, the fish that are brought in on a high tide. So this is going to be a problem. It's going to be an increasing problem in more locations over the next 30 years. Next, please. So what we did is we trained our citizen scientists, citizens advisory committee members, and we told them, hey, go out to these different places. We gave them an app to be able to check the tide. And we asked them to measure the distance between the water and the top of a seawall or the top of a dock or the top of a drainage ditch. And then we kind of predicted, well, would it be underwater with mean higher high water, which is just the average high water, and it's not the super high tides. And there's color coding here, and red means we have flooding right now. And so the only place that's red right now on these sites is Riverview Drive in Bradenton. But you see a couple of those pins that are green. What that means is, like, even in 30 years, we don't think there's going to be a problem. So most seawalls are not going to be overtopped in 30 years. They could be with a king tide. They certainly could be with a storm, but it's not going to be like every month I go and have water coming over the top of the seawall. So it's not going to be like that, we don't think. Maybe in 100 years, maybe in 80 years, but not in 30 years. But the areas in yellow are areas where that will happen. And we're going to see a lot of docks that are going to be flooded on a regular basis. And people are, what can I do about it? You can make it a floating dock. I mean, some of this is stuff we can deal with. But the other thing that we're seeing is a lot of storm drains are going to be fully submerged. And if it rains, when your storm drain is full of seawater, then that road is not going to drain. And that's going to be a problem that's going to be increasingly evident over the next couple of decades. Next one, please. I think the next one is the lower bay, and the same kind of thing. And right up on the very top, you have a yellow and a green marker there. And the green marker is the seawall at Marina Jacks. It's not going to be overtopped, but the yellow is a storm drain. And what that means is that when it rains on a high tide, the water is going to pool in the street because it's not going to be able to go out into the bay because the storm drain is full of water. And that's the kind of phenomenon we're going to see more and more often. Next one, please. So the next one is something we're really kind of excited about, not excited about what's going to happen, but excited about putting up a potential strategy. So this is mangroves at Bayfront Park in downtown Sarasota. So if you come down Ringling Boulevard and you keep walking straight, you go, I think, into Marina Jacks. If you turn left when you get to the water, you see this site. And what we have here is it's a small little seawall. It's not a massive one. But on the right-hand side, on the outside, is a mangrove. And if we don't do something, that mangrove is going to drown in place, because mangroves can't be, fully submerged all the time. They need to be able to migrate upslope. And if you have a seawall, that intercepts their ability to migrate upslope. So what are we going to do? Well, at least for the next 30 years, we think we can accommodate it in some places by taking out that seawall, moving the shoreline a couple of feet, farther to the east, and then grading it and allowing the mangroves to persist over the next 30 years. This isn't going to be something that can be done everywhere, but it's something that can be done here. And that's the sort of thing that we think actually we're going to be able to make this a kind of a high profile project to say, folks, if we don't do this in more places, we're going to lose mangroves. And if you lose mangroves, it's not a good thing for the bay. Next one, please. All right, so this is kind of a cool little graphic. This is, again, real data. It's not a model. This is real data. And what it is it compares monthly temperature in Sarasota County against the average for the period of 1900 to 1999. So it's a century-long average for each month. And you can see in the prior century, it's a mixture of blues and yellows and browns. And what it means is the average, if your month, like say June of 2014, is exactly the average of June of that prior 100 years, then you are a clear box. It's a gray box. If you're cooler than that, then you become kind of like a light blue to dark blue. If you're warmer than that, you become a light yellow to a brown. And as you can see, the last couple of decades, there's much more yellow and brown than there is gray and blue. And what that means is across the months, we are getting warmer. And that's just not a model. That's what's really happening. Our temperatures are getting warmer. And the neat thing is, it's not just that we're getting hotter, we're not getting as cold anymore. Next one, please. This is a cool one. This is the number of freezing days per decade going back over 100 years as measured at the Sarasota airport. And so you can see there's warmer periods and there's cooler periods. But in general, we used to average around 20 to 30 per decade, which is the same as 2 to 3 per year. But look at the last 10 years, 2011 to 2020, we had 3 days in a decade where we had freezes. And we used to get like 2 to 3 per year. So the number of freezes has dramatically reduced. And the way that a lot of people can kind of, experience this is, so if you've lived in Florida a long time, you remember how you would have your dedicated sheets that you would use to cover your landscaping and your citrus trees and everything like that? And you would do that when you had a freeze. So when's the last time you did that? And everyone remembers doing it, but I can't remember the last time I did. I didn't remember what our sheets were. We had these sheets when my daughter was a little kid, and they were kind of like, I don't know where the hell we got them, but like that's what we used to cover our plants with. We haven't used it in like a long time because it just doesn't freeze anymore. That's not entirely true. It does freeze every once in a while, about every 3 years, but we used to get 3 per year. So this is something that's real too, as well. So next one, please. This is minimum summer temperatures. And this is, again, going back 100 years. And here's the link to the data. And if you look at the June, what this basically shows is over the last 40 years, the minimum temperature, so the coldest temperature of June in any year is going up. And if we look at August, the last 20 years, we haven't had a single hour of a single day in any of the August months over the last 20 years. That's 600 days. It's 20 years times 30 days per month, 600 days. We haven't had a single reading cooler than 70 degrees. We used to start off August days in the 60s, doesn't happen anymore. The coolest we'll be is in the 70s. And that's the reality of what's happening with our temperatures. Next one, please. So a couple of reasons why that matters. Harmful algal blooms. So imagine you're like a Iowa corn farmer. You don't plant too early because you don't want your crop to be damaged by cold temperatures. Well, if you want to grow algae, cold temperatures will, knock algae back. Well, it's not getting as cold anymore. And what we think we're seeing, we don't have a perfect data set for this, is it looks like we're reaching like 68 degrees a month earlier than we did a couple of decades ago. So 68 degrees is 20 degrees Celsius, and it's kind of like a good number to use. And it's something that pops up on a graph and all that sort of thing. And it used to be that we would get to like 68 degrees, maybe at the end of March going into April. Now we're getting to the end of February going into March. So we're getting to 68 degrees earlier than we used to, which means algae can grow longer. And if it gets to the point where we never get below 68 degrees, it could be that we don't have a 10-month growing season for harmful algal blooms. It could be that we have a 10-year growing season. So it matters to water quality. Fisheries, talk to recreational fishing guides, talk to the researchers. Bait fish are showing up earlier, tarpon are showing up earlier. The University of Florida and Florida Fish and Wildlife are showing both snook and mangroves expanding northward. If you've ever been up to the Homosassa River, which is north of like a Crystal River area, it's a beautiful river to go out to the Gulf of Mexico. And it used to be these gorgeous like black needle rush marshes. It's not hardly any black needle rush at all because it's now mangroves, because mangroves used to be able to grow up there, but they'd be knocked back by a freeze, but we're not getting freezes hardly at all anymore. So that's one thing. And this is one thing that's a little bit disturbing, which is sea turtle sex ratios. So the temperature of a nest controls the sex that a sea turtle will be. And you actually, it's not uncommon for there to be, in a lot of wild animal populations, there's a lot more females than males, because you only need one male to impregnate a bunch of females. That's just the way it is. And so we probably always had more females than males, but it's not uncommon now for us to have nests in Florida where 90% of the sea turtle hatchlings are female. And that's just not going to be that helpful. And in the Florida Keys, they basically said they haven't found a male sea turtle hatchling in years now. So that's going to be a problem. Next one, please. And kind of getting close to the end here. Heat is fuel for tropical storms and hurricanes. So you may have heard people say that a hurricane is a heat engine. And what that means is like it uses the thermal energy of warm water and warm, moist air, and it turns it into mechanical energy. So think of it this way. An engine turns, one form of energy into another. Your car takes chemical energy and turns it into mechanical energy. Well, hurricane takes thermal energy and turns it into mechanical energy. It takes the heat that's contained, the thermal energy of warm air and warm water, and it turns it into mechanical energy, which is wind and waves and storm surge. And so if you add more solar radiation and more heat because of greenhouse gases, then you're going to have more tropical storms. So this is a data set that goes back to before the Civil War. And what it shows is over the last 40 years, we have an upward trend. I apologize. These little red lines are what's called the 5-point moving average. So I apologize. That's my bad. So the 5-point moving average shows an increase in tropical storms. The more disturbing thing is the one on the right. That is Category 3 hurricanes. And we had Category 3 hurricanes. We had Category 5 hurricanes that occurred, over 100 years ago. But you'll notice as well, there's a whole lot of years where the value is 0. And what that means is in the earlier part of this record on the right-hand side, we had a lot of years where we had maybe a tropical storm, but it wasn't a major one. It's very rare for us not to have a major hurricane anymore. This is the North Atlantic Basin. So we're seeing more storms, and we're seeing, for the most part, storms are becoming more powerful. Next one, please. So we're going to transition pretty quickly into the last part of it, which is, you can't just end this presentation without talking about Ian. And so this is what Ian did. The left-hand side is the wind field, and it shows the darker color is basically hurricane force winds. We had hurricane force winds from basically Bradenton all the way down to Naples almost. This is much bigger impact than Charlie. And it's a much bigger storm than Hurricane Andrew was. The middle one is rainfall distribution. And you can see the area of yellow is like from 5 to 10 inches of rain. and the area of green is 10 to 15, and the blue is 15 to 20 inches. And so our watershed had anywhere between 5 to almost 20 inches of rain. And that's the reality. This was a very windy, very wet storm, much more rainfall than we had with Hurricane Charlie. And the picture on the right-hand side, we're not quite sure exactly if this is accurate or not, but in this one, the colors that are warmer either represent a phytoplankton bloom or plumes of tannins that are coming out. And we think it's probably a mixture of both. But there is red tide offshore of Sarasota right now. And we have created this big giant pulse of nutrients that went out into the Eastern Bay. So the possibility is that we're going to have an algal bloom. The possibility is we're going to start a red tide. Or it could be that the red tide peters out. We just don't know, but we are continuing to stay on top of it. That's the last thing we need is another red tide. Next one, please. And then I think I'll just, kind of end this with a couple of pictures. And this is, these are before and after pictures of what it looked like before Ian and after Ian from roughly the same picture, roughly the same vantage, excuse me. So the picture on the left is Blackburn Bay looking down towards the south, towards Venice Inlet. And that is, the picture on the left is taken in August. And we were bragging about how beautiful Sarasota Bay was in August. The picture on the right is in October. And so Megan had hired these folks. They were doing a great job for us in shooting drone footage. And they went and revisited a couple of days after the hurricane. So when you hear people talking about how Sarasota Bay looked like root beer, that's kind of like what we mean. It looks like root beer. It doesn't smell like root beer. It smells like compost and dead fish, but this is what it looks like. This is Little Sarasota Bay, roughly the same area. The kind of brownish tint is probably a combination of a phytoplankton bloom and tannins in that system. Next one, please. I think the next one might be Roberts Bay. Yeah, so Roberts Bay, the big difference right there, it's the same kind of general area. And look at the difference in the water clarity. It's just tannins. Tannins by themselves aren't bad, but this is an awful lot of stuff from an unnatural watershed. So it's grass clippings, it's dog poop, it's failed septic tanks because the water table is too high. We've had over 20 million gallons of wastewater overflow. So this is an awful lot of stuff washing down into our waters right now. Next, please. And really what we want to, I'm going to pass it over to Megan now, but really the point we're trying to make is that like a cleaner bay is a more resilient bay. There's reasons to pay attention to pollutant loads because your day in, day out experience with that bay is going to be more enjoyable if it's cleaner. But we've learned after Hurricane Donna and after Hurricane Charlie and then after Hurricane Irma, where we had good data, that the cleaner the bay is, the better able it's going to be able to withstand impacts from hurricanes. So a more resilient bay comes about if you're a healthier bay. If this hurricane would have hit Indian River Lagoon, they don't really have the capacity to absorb a hit like that than we do. And again, we had the best water quality in the last 5 to 15 years. Last year, this is a good thing because it's kind of putting it to a test. Now I'm going to turn it over to Megan because again, it's a three-legged stool. The regulators, the regulated community, and the general public. What are you going to do to help us out?
Perfect. So, of course, one of our primary initiatives happening right now is Hurricane Ian recovery efforts. So we are a small team. There's 5 of us. There's only so much we can do, but what we can do is amplify existing efforts and connect people to those efforts. So on our website, we have a page that links people to ongoing cleanup projects, ways you can help. Of course, a lot of our communities in Sarasota were not as hard hit as those south of us. So we are sending people further south for some of these. But we do have one in Sarasota coming up on Saturday. So I encourage you to check out our website. Right on the homepage, the first thing that comes up is our Hurricane Ian recovery efforts link. So, we care about these communities. Part of what makes Sarasota Bay great are the people that live around it. We want to foster those efforts that are ongoing. And as Dave just said, there's a lot of stuff happening with the Bay, a lot of good news, but a lot of challenges. And I get to kind of come in with all the exciting, what can you do? How can you help news, which is my job, which I'm so happy to do. I get to see people get involved, really care about the Bay, work together on these projects. It's awesome. The first thing I want to say about what you can do is you can just learn. We have a story map that we just released that outlines what our comprehensive conservation and management plan says. which is really how we're going to work on water quality, habitat, and wildlife the next 5 years. And, Dave outlined some of our priorities there, but this story map really dives into the project sites and the specific initiatives and, the challenges and the successes that we want to continue. So I do encourage you to read through it in
Megan,
that story map. Yes.
can you just tell people about the QR code and how they can do it right
Yeah.
now?
So if you want to scan this while I'm talking, feel free. This QR code right here, underneath the birds on the left, if you use your mobile phone and zoom in on it, it'll take you right to that website. We, of course, have a link to it on our sarasotobay.org. And I also have a QR code at the very end of this presentation if while we're answering Q&A, you want to scan it. But go ahead and scan that if you're able to. We have a version for your phone, a version for your desktop. We just want to make it engaging and interesting because we know not everyone wants to read a 200-page PDF with a bunch of data. Some of us do, and it's there if you'd like to see it, but this is a really great way for you to learn more about what we're doing and what our plans are moving forward. And there's also some video of staff in there too. So it's a great tool. We're excited to launch it, and we encourage you to share the word and learn more. Of course, one of the aspects we're known for is our volunteer program. We have so many fun ways that you can get involved with Sarasota Bay. This project is very labor intensive, pictured here, 35-pound bag oyster bags. We had 700 to do that day. We were all very sore. I never slept so well in my whole life, but it was a great project. And we do projects like this. We do different native planting projects. We do some projects that just require maintenance, like weeding our living shoreline. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get involved hands-on with what we're doing. And of course, we post those events and opportunities on our website as they become available on our social media. You can sign up for our newsletter. We are always trying to get people out and involved. And of course, in the cooler months, we definitely ramp these up. So stay on the lookout if you want to get your hands dirty, come out and help, meet other people that like to do this stuff too. There's other ways that you can help the Bay and stay connected with us. For instance, vertical oyster gardens. These are a really neat kind of, I guess I would say like green infrastructure tool that we've been promoting with Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So essentially we take dead oysters that still have this natural biofilm on them, and we drill holes and string them together, kind of like a necklace, and hang them below docks. And what they'll do is they'll actually colonize new life, like tunicates, other oysters. They provide habitat for, little crabs and fish. It's a really neat way to kind of see the Bay come to life right under your dock. And we're trying to promote these, as opposed to some of the other underdock projects we've seen, like plastic reefs and things like that. So this is a really great initiative. And since you guys are in Manatee County, I would encourage you to go out to Robinson Preserve. There is a oyster adoption station there. You can learn more about oysters and take one home, take two home for free, and put them under your dock. And they have them, of course, all throughout Robinson Preserve as well. So this is a really cool way to get engaged, stay connected. And then we love to hear how your oysters are doing too, because everyone's just so amazed at how 6 months later, this thing looks completely different than it did when you first put it in. Some other things that you can do just in your home is to, as Dave said, be mindful of your fertilizer use. If you're using reclaimed water, you may not even need fertilizer. If you do need fertilizer, don't over fertilize and fertilize only in the dry season. A very simple, easy way that you can have a big impact on the quality of water in our Bay. In your yard, if you have a gutter, just reroute the spouts. There's an extension that goes in the bottom of the gutter. Just turn that water that's coming into your driveway into the drain, just into the grass so it can percolate naturally back into the ground. It's a really simple, easy way we've been trying to promote. And then lastly, for those of you who live in the community with a pond, we want to encourage people to take care of their pond. Your pond is an asset. You can plant the edges, you can add aquatic plants, really make it more of an environment, and try and promote that, that little portion of the watershed that you have in your community. So we want to tell you to do it, but we also want to support you if you're interested in doing it. We have a grant program that's starting January 1st. We're actually awarding applicants up to $10,000 in funds for these projects. This is a reimbursement grant, and we fund so many different types of projects over the years. So picture on the left is a water goat that was put into a waterway, I think near Sarasota High School, just to capture floating trash. In the middle, we have compost bins, and on the right, we have I believe it's a native garden near the celery field. So again, we have so many different projects we funded. If you have an idea for a project, if you were inspired by something I mentioned earlier, reach out to me because again, our cycle's starting up in January and I'd love to work with you on your idea. This is a huge part of how Sarasota Bay Estuary Program helps our community really do their part when it comes to the quality of our bay. So I'll end it by saying, which future do you want? Of course, as Dave said, there are 3 different roles here, and your role is that of what the public can do. So everything I just mentioned and some, I mean, you're doing a huge favor to us by staying with us tonight and learning about our organization and what you can do, but spread the word, get involved, apply for a grant, come to an event. There's so many different ways that you can help take care of our region's greatest asset. We're so proud of, the communities that we have surrounding our bay, and I think it's evident, how beautiful our bay is, that we should all care and continue to care. And of course, on the right is the Indian River Lagoon, who we try not to pick on too much, but they are an example of what can happen if you don't do the things we just mentioned. And I will end with this slide here that has Dave's contact information and then that QR code again. If you missed it earlier, go ahead and scan that with your phone and read through the plan. And if you're not able to now, just visit sarasotabay.org. It's right on our homepage. So I will go ahead and stop sharing so we can all be together again, but I'll actually give it a minute if anyone wants to jot down that info. Dave, anything else you want to chime in here at the end?
No, thank you, Megan, for bringing us home. And, you can visit us on the web. You can visit us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can click on that, point your camera at it, and you'll go right to the story map that I got to tell you, it's really pretty cool. It's done by Megan. And within that is a 240-page CCMP, a Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan. So the cool thing about that is you can read it, you can do a search. So if, in other words, if you want to see what do we say about clams, you can find that. If you want to have someone read it to you in an Australian male accent, you can have that. So, whatever you want to do. So I actually, it's one of the neat things is we make it so that anyone can find out what it is. But the story map is one of the coolest things. So play around with that, roll through there, and it's just really neat way to experience like a summary of what it is that we're trying to talk about. And if you want the greater detail, there's a link in there to the comprehensive management plan in a PDF format. So it's just, this is a really neat product. I want to give Megan a shout out again for,
Can you guys see it?
Yep. We're reaching a whole lot more
sure.
people than we used to. And so this is what happens when you click on that website.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
And then a lot of people ask us, where is Sarasota Bay? What's the watershed? We have that map here that lays it out too and goes into the challenges and state of each bay as well. So a lot more detail, kind of building off of what we talked about tonight. Just a fun tool. So if you can't tell, we're geeking out a little bit over it. We really love it.
No, it's really incredible. And I want to see if anybody has any questions, but I also want to mention, I did spend a little bit of time on the website. I was blown away at how much information you have on your website. And I was also very impressed with all the different collaborative efforts you have with volunteers. And it seems like there's always things coming up and different initiatives. So I would encourage everybody on this meeting tonight to make sure that they spend a little bit time on the website and look at the amazing information that you have put together. Are there any questions of anyone here on the call? You can raise your hand or put it in chat. Any questions?
Nancy raised her hand.
Okay, Nancy, you're on mute still. No question. Just waving.
I have a question, or at least a request, Dave. I was wondering if you could explain the collaborative effort that you did immediately after Ian. I think if they haven't heard that story, it's.
Yeah, so, when Ian happened, I think Ian landed like about Wednesday, Thursday, something like that. So the first day, most people just wandering around, seeing what their neighborhood's like. And I live farther north than any of the staff. Megan lives in Bradenton. I live in Palmetto. And, we had wind damage, but we had a lot of tree damage and all that, but it wasn't that bad. And so we checked in with all our staff. And we had staff that didn't have electricity. Megan didn't have it for more than a week, I think. So.
It was brutal.
And so, we basically checked in on each other and we're doing okay. We had, Cheryl had a tree that fell, leaned against her house. And so, we helped out each other. But then my buddy and I, one of my neighbors, we went down to Northport because we have boats and I have a little dinghy. And we were gonna see, well, what could we do? If you see hurricanes, you'll see people in like little boats going out and helping people. So that's what we did. We went down to Northport. And then while we were down there, we're like, oh my God, the water was just disgusting. The septic tanks were not able to function properly because the water table is too high. There were porta potties all over the place that were knocked over by the wind. Because whenever you have a lot of construction, like in Northport, every construction site, every new home construction is going to have a porta potty. They were all blown over and in the street. So there were porta potties going down the street, floating around. It was just disgusting. And it reminded us of what happened after Hurricane Charlie. And after Hurricane Charlie, Charlotte Harbor went basically anoxic, no oxygen for about 2 to 3 weeks. And the Peace River went anoxic for about 2 to 3 months. So that was on Saturday. Sunday, myself and Brandon Moody with Charlotte County. And Brandon is Heather Moody, who's our staff finance person, or her husband. He did a phenomenal job. And Water Management District staff, we designed a water quality monitoring program that we initiated Tuesday. So we went from concept to implementation in 3 days. We're very proud of it. And what we found when we were out there is there's so much fresh water that in most of Sarasota Bay, that kind of that root beer looking water, it's on the top. It's not the full volume. It's on the top. And the salt water from the Gulf of Mexico is on the bottom. So the bottom of Sarasota Bay is kind of isolated salty water that's overlaid by fresher water. And so that means the oxygen on the bottom, there's no oxygenation from the atmosphere. It's too dark for photosynthesis. So the oxygen just starts going down. So we have very little oxygen in the bottom of Sarasota Bay due to what we call salinity stratification. If you go farther south, 11 Bay, you see all the green leaves blown off of the trees. And so all of that is like a really rich compost, but it's not a compost heap in your backyard. It's a compost heap in the bay. And so that's decomposing. And so we're seeing very little oxygen. We're seeing really sky high bacteria levels. So if you want to help friends out, I understand it. I did it, but be very careful because the combination of high organic content, low oxygen creates a breeding ground for some really nasty bacteria. And we've had 29 cases a week ago in Lee County of what's called Vibrio vulnificus. And it typically has like a mortality rate of 10 to 50%. And we've got 29 cases of it. Basically, it's a real outlier. So we're going to see, we've already had people die from the water getting infected with bacteria, and we're going to have more of them. So we're just trying to tell people, when the water looks like this, when it smells like that, don't go in it unless you have to. And if you do go in it, be very careful. Because you may not have a cut on your leg, but you may cut your leg while you're in that water. So just be real careful. It's going to take a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months for it to come back. But again, we're more resilient because we're cleaner. So I think we will come back, but it's going to be tough for a couple of weeks now. And definitely don't go in the water unless you have to. Be very careful. If you've got a compromised immune system, just stay out, stay away.
Thank you. That was a good explanation. Now we have just a few more minutes if anyone has any more questions, comments. And again, you can reach Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. They have links for emails. You can ask questions. They get back to you. It's really impressive. I just went right on the website and emailed Megan, and boom, got an answer back. It was really very, very helpful. I just can't say enough of how grateful we are for this resource right here in our community.
And I like to add one more thing, which is what you guys do is really important because, the League of Women Voters and the way you kind of it's not like you vet people, but you ask them questions that are important for them to answer. And, I've got 2 county commissioners, 2 on my board. I got city commissioners. So far, the willingness to pay for environmental projects for, very expensive stormwater retrofits, wastewater upgrades, it's been bipartisan support. I mean, County Commission for Sarasota is not a Democrat for 20 years. Manatee's got one. It doesn't matter. We're getting the agreement because people understand it's a bipartisan issue. Water quality is important to Republicans, Democrats, Independents. So we have no problem with that. But there are some people that just don't care about water quality. It doesn't matter what their party is, and it's not a partisan issue. St. Pete is about as blue of a city as you get. And they got one of the worst wastewater collection and treatment systems in the state of Florida. So it's not a partisan issue, but there are politicians that just couldn't care less about the environment, and they come in all parties. And it's important for people to realize more of your constituents care about water quality than don't.
Yeah, that's so true.
Well, it's central to life where we live, in so many ways, I think. So
Yeah, economy certainly, and definitely quality of life, and just the enjoyment of the environment. So
I can tell you one thing that's really, you'll find it hard to believe, but my friend with the Indian River Lagoon, the chairman of his policy committee is a Brevard County commissioner. And he was asked what they should do about the manatee issue in the Indian River Lagoon. And his response was they needed to be culled. So in other words, there's too many manatees. Like, give someone send people out on boats with a shotgun. This is, nobody on our coast is going to say that. But that's the reality of what some elected officials are saying over on the East Coast. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing a lot better than the Indian River Lagoon. We don't have people as idiotic as that dude.
Thank goodness. Okay, we're getting close to the top of the hour. If there are no more questions, we certainly don't want to take any more of your time, but we are so grateful for the information and the resources that you've shared with us. And we definitely will be following up with our group to see if we can put together some sort of program where we can help you out.
Excellent. And thank you so much for reaching out to us, Ruth. We're glad to be here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you guys at our events or some other capacity around the Bay.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Ruth,
Thanks, everybody.